Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our one-to-one series. Martin Redmayne here as usual. Joined today by the guys from Mayfair Marine, Howard Lowe and Ivo Veldhuis. Welcome, guys. How are you?
Good morning, Martin. We're very well, thank you, and certainly nice to be joining this morning and having a chat about things.
Yeah, Ivo, how are you? Where are you, Ivo?
Hi, good morning, Martin. I'm calling you from the sunny side of Turkey in Antalya this morning. And I've moved here over the last summer together with my family.
Lovely part of the world. Lovely.
Indeed, it is.
How are you?
I'm in London, so.
Jolly good, jolly good. All right, so the format of these one-to-ones are very, very simple. I've obviously got two people on the screen this time, which I've done before with Repack. It's a candid conversation. I come up with what I call an interesting title that suits the topics of the expertise on the screen. And hopefully we can have a nice, punchy chat about what we can change. So, Howard, I'm going to ask you first, because this is one of my opening questions. I'm sure you've seen it. What frustrates you about our marketplace?
I think that the customer experience at the moment is not as good as it could be. A lot of our time is spent, let's say, defending positions, part technical, part legal. The number of discussions about change orders and costs of change, and actually, primarily, Eva and myself are from a technical background, and rather than getting on and just sorting out the technical matters, there's already a commercial angle on something, and of course that's important. But the whole sort of framework that we rush to get into these contracts, and there's a great rush, and some others have already talked about that. We know the build time, but actually, if there's more effort put up front to sort some things out, do the due diligence, really plan things out, invest in some front-end engineering, it would really make the whole experience more pleasant, because we're having to have conversations with owners that we shouldn't have to have. Paying for some changes, moving some structure around because the shipyard made an area too small. These fundamental things should be clearly established, and we should have a smoother execution.
Yeah. Ivo, what frustrates you?
I think mostly, it's the blame culture that we have, or to a certain extent, the yes cultures that we have. So what I mean by that is that obviously we're working with some very, powerful people and very wealthy people who are used to have things their way, and with yachting and engineering, sometimes things cannot always go their way, and sometimes it's difficult to operate in those kind of things. And what frustrates us the most is not being able to have an honest and clear conversation with owners, because you have to penetrate the bubble before you actually get somebody to understand what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I call this session Stage of Independence, and it's very, very clear to me that if I was an owner brand new to the market, or have been in the market for a few years and looking to build or looking to do something more adventurous with my sort of yacht ownership route, like doing a big refit or doing something interesting for a new project, how do I get truly independent, objective advice or information? This is something I think sometimes it's not very easy. Any comments?
I think perhaps just to start, the advice needs to avoid being bundled with another product. If we think a little bit how the legal services are provided within the industry, there's generally little comment about the sort of legal view being unbiased, and that's separated from the brokerage section and the other elements that need to take place in a transaction. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important that the technical services are seen like that. And also people really sort of need to look a little bit at the competence of the team, and because sometimes you see a sort of quite a big organization, but actually when you drill down to the technical elements, it's quite slim. It's a little bit of a veneer, and really look at the background. And certainly, speaking personally, and one of our principles, Ivo, myself, and other colleagues, we've worked in shipyards. I sort of grew up in some of the last commercial shipbuilding here in the UK. Spent some time on the shipyard side of the table, and now on the owner side of the table. But also, we're working with shipyards too, and I think that's important. You have to sort of earn the respect to be there. So I think certainly, that sort of approach is an important one.
I think, yeah, well, to a certain extent, similar. I think both, like I said, both Howard and myself, we've seen both sides of the table, worked for shipyard and worked for owners. I always thought that the job of an owner's rep was always the most cushiest job that you could possibly get. Now, having done it myself, it is one of the hardest jobs there is, because you're the one who has to explain to the client that things have not gone according to plan, and that's a pretty tough position to be in. So, with regards to independence, is that we wanted to be an interface between owners and shipyard, and that's why we are calling ourselves truly independent, because we understand how both sides work. We have an appreciation for what the owner is thinking, and we have an appreciation for what the shipyard is thinking. So with both those independent viewpoints, we're obviously trying to gel the process between the two.
Yeah. You say that's an interesting task of explaining to the owner that things have gone wrong or not according to plan. Going back to Howard's point, a good plan changes the whole game anyway. And I think that's part of the problem we're facing at the moment, isn't it? The plans are never really made in a robust way.
That's correct. I think one of the things that we see a lot in the in these larger projects, certainly with owners going further afield and not going to the typical shipyards, is having a good plan is actually worth your money, to be honest. Yeah. One of our frustrations is, or certainly a personal frustration that I have, is the fact that projects are not properly engineered prior to contract, or prior to the concept that you are dealing with is not properly engineered and not properly thought through to various levels of detail. And basically only the outer shell is really presented to the owner, and the inner layers are just not properly developed, and that you'll pay for that later on, essentially. Yeah. Because the complexity through these various layers is obviously more complex than people have thought.
It's an interesting topic, because I often think how much time and money is wasted because that doesn't happen. Are there any sort of numbers or perspectives on this? You think, actually, if we did spend more up front, two things happen. One is you reduce the build time, but also how much of a percentage saving do you think there could be?
Well, I think if you... let me answer first. Then, if you take the extreme side of things, then obviously we can take the example of the cruise ship industry, where essentially a 300 meter or 320 meter cruise ship is put together in 12 months. Blocks are pre-assembled. Interior is put up in a matter of days, and so forth. And obviously, to achieve that seamless, what looks like a seamless process, to achieve that in the 12-month period, there is a lot of front-end engineering that goes on. Yeah. And obviously, and there's probably they spend a lot of time and effort on that, but they also, shipyards like Chantier Atlantique, for instance, and I think the Alstom of this world, they approach their subcontractors in a very in a different manner. They very much front load the contracts with these with their suppliers with engineering milestones, to the extent that the engineering milestones consist of nearly 50% of the value of the contract. So obviously things are done in a different way in that industry, and I think we can very much learn from that. So front loading of the engineering process is really something that we could learn from other projects. And you see that also obviously in aviation and the car industry and so forth. Yeah.
Howard, any comment on how much do you think we could save if we were better at pre-engineering and planning?
I think just putting the project management hats on, we talk about the cost of change, and if you start sort of right at the early stage, you have a factor of 1. If we make that change just before delivery, it can be 10 times as expensive. So immediately, even when you've started the build, you're already into 2 or 3 on the scale. So I think the 3 sort of fundamentals are time, cost, and quality, and we can have a reasonable influence on quality. We can also influence cost. Time is the hardest one. Once a project is set running, it is the hardest one, and because we're not physically doing it either, from a sort of advisory role. So if more effort is put up front, I think certainly on some projects, you could probably be looking at a factor of 15 to 20%. Particularly where things haven't gone so well that are avoided, and also you avoid all of the legal pain. Sort of having been there many years ago with a process where a project was late and there were protracted legal negotiations to resolve that afterwards, and a settlement made. All that time and effort really is we don't want to be putting ourselves through that. Let's try and get something right. Let's try and have a contractual framework that works from the beginning.
One of the things I want to just dissect in almost a bit of a tangential conversation is when you look at projects today, and you've got lots of experience across the marketplace, how exciting are they, do you think, in terms of technology, innovation, future thinking? Where are we heading on that topic? Because I feel that there's still a lot of fossil fuel, predictable projects still coming out. What do you think?
Oh, touchy subject, Martin. You know me quite well. Before I go into my usual rant, I think one of the things I would like to say is that I think our if I compare ourselves with another industry, which is the car industry and the trucking industry, for instance. As you know, I do a lot of work also as an EU expert, and I evaluate all those European projects. And there has been a lot of those in the last 4 years. And what I have learned from this process is that obviously internal combustion engines as a technology is nearing the end of its useful life, so to speak. And in most Western European countries, the timeline for banning internal combustion engines on roads is 2030, 2027. You hear the numbers roughly. Yet, when we are talking about the superyacht industry, we are happily continuing on the bandwagon of the internal combustion engine. And there seems to be no talk about banning internal combustion engines or moving away from them, regardless of the alternative. Obviously, there are many alternatives, but regardless of the alternative, there seems to be no discussion about where we are going. So, there is obviously a lot of talk also about turning the Mediterranean into a low emission control zone, similar to the North Sea. The cruise ship industry is very hard and very actively trying to move to zero emission propulsion systems. Yet in the superyacht industry, we are happily continuing like there is nothing happening. So I see this wall coming towards us, and all the shipyards are very much walking towards the wall, and I'm thinking, well, the collision between those two is going to be quite tough, and it's not far away. It's only 10 years away.
Yeah.
So I think we have to move away from internal combustion engines, and it requires a change in technology, and it requires a change in fuel. And that is very much I think we haven't mentioned it directly, but one of the things that Mayfair Marine did is we've become a member of Hydrogen Europe. And we are actively working with Hydrogen Europe to work towards building a consensus to introduce new fuels and to introduce new technology into the superyacht industry. And there, in the policy papers that we're working on, you clearly hear a step change is required and a change in fuel is required. And that I can't yet see that in the yachting industry.
Yeah. How does this concern you?
Absolutely. One of my big frustrations for quite a long time, and also sort of having dealt with through life support for a number of vessels and dealing with them operationally, is energy efficiency and moving away from the propulsion, because with most yachts, the annual running hours on the main engines are pretty low. So even if we stuck with existing technology a little bit longer there, if actually we go after the sort of hotel loads and the power generated on board, that's really where the big saving is there. The ones that are running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's really seems little effort to try and reduce the consumption of all of the systems. There's been a few improvements because of technology. The LED lighting has yielded some results, for example, as it's sort of filtered through. But really looking at air conditioning, which is one of the biggest consumers, and the smarter things we can do with air conditioning, but nobody really seems too interested in doing it, to be quite honest. And I think, that's really we have this mentality that, if we need a bit more power, well, we'll just upsize the generator, we'll make the tank bigger. And you start with a project of a certain size and it grows. And, we're working on a very large one at the moment and still having massive space constraints. And it's sort of the wrong approach. We shouldn't be fighting for millimeters on 100 plus meter platforms.
Yeah. So why do you think this is? What's the sort of the hurdle we have to overcome? Because I think one of my concerns is, and it's a general comment that I've had with several people, is that we may be putting some clients off completely. That the forward-thinking, future-thinking, next-gen clients may think this is not a very exciting, interesting, innovative marketplace. We know there's some cool things happening across certain projects, but actually the majority of what we're showing the market is the same projects of 10, 15, 20 years ago. So what do you think the barriers really are? Is it design, the sales process, shipyards being more conservative than they need to be? What do you think?
I think we're probably too compartmentalized, and Ivo and I were just discussing this yesterday, that if we really sort of we've got a lot of great people, great individuals, great minds within the industry, but we sort of work even within organizations, you see it almost like silos, and one department doesn't talk to another, and everybody's sort of focused on their immediate things and doing well with that particular aspect. And we need to collaborate more openly, because if we take this sort of fragmented approach with the blinkers on, we'll never get the step change that we need. And maybe it's a different sort of project platform, it's a different sort of contract, that the partnering of the risk sharing and everything else is different. But it probably takes a sort of a pioneering individual to introduce that, or sort of put that team together, if you like, to see the step change. Because I think it's one party alone is not going to do so, unless that they're forced to do so by regulation, which is what we've seen in sort of the automotive markets.
And in essence, that's coming our way as well, in terms of the whole maritime landscape will suddenly say, listen, Tier 3 and all these things are now definitely going to make sure that you have to change quite dramatically.
Yes, correct. Yeah. I just wanted to also highlight that to what Howard was saying about this industry-wide collaboration, is that it's not just the shipyards and the owners, it's also, to a certain extent, I think, the lawyers who need to, because the lawyers set up the rules of the contract, so to speak, and then you sort of need to, at least that is sort of our opinion, you need to sort of move away from the blame culture, and if something goes wrong with the shipyard, it's the shipyard's fault. And this is more my personal opinion, is that there needs to be a more collaborative approach also from the lawyers, I think, to set up the rules of the game, or the rules of the contract in a more collaborative spirit, where the lawyers advise about pre-engineering, the lawyers advise about the regulations, the lawyers advise about the changing landscape and the future proofing of concepts and so forth. So yeah, that's very much what I think we should do.
Yeah. I spoke to Engel de Boer from Lloyd's Register the other day in one of these sessions, and it was like he was concerned that there's so much, as you say, how fragmentation, that no one really is trying to work together to get the best result. It's every man for himself in many cases, and especially on the sheer number of small subcontractors or integrators, that they're sometimes not able to cope with the demands or the actual expectation. Is that one of our other problems in terms of the size and scale of the intermediaries and the subcontractors and the players, that they haven't got the scale to be effective for this change?
I think we've obviously the market is quite mixed from some very large players and smaller ones who sort of bring the expertise in. I think we need more to share the risk. That's probably one of the biggest things, and risk, applies right across the board. So that at the moment we go into this, just sort of picking up with what Ivo was saying about this legal framework and liquidated damages are there. Well, of course, if you start on that, the shipyard are not going to want to introduce many innovative things when they're likely to be penalised for it. So if we take a different approach, and that even applies to a smaller subcontractor, they might have less to lose perhaps, but in some ways they might have more to lose because it's their whole livelihood.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, that, in terms of how the supply chain can be damaged very quickly by what I call this lack of collaboration. Going back to your legal framework approach, that we saw over the past 10 years, numbers of subcontractors disappear or go bankrupt because of these approaches we've seen. So that always stifles, and you, as you correctly say, stifles that desire to innovate, the desire to optimize and improve projects to a new level. So we're almost in fear of our future, if you like.
Yeah, I think, Martin, what to a certain extent we can also learn from other industries where they have supply chains and so forth. One of the topics that I did want to sort of introduce today is what we see in the commercial marine industry occurring a lot more, is what we call the concept of digital twins. And it might have come up in other conversations as well, and also the classification societies are now quite used to do that. But if I talk about the concept of digital twins, and maybe for the people watching, digital twin is simply a database of all the information in a coherent software platform that starts at the beginning of the project and continues with the project until literally the boat is scrapped, until the end of at the end of its life. It's been quite successfully used. It's being used now in cruise ships, being used in container ships, and so forth. And there, in a digital twin environment, subcontractors all use the same database, all use the same data set of information. There is no room for error because you're using the same data, you're using the same 3D model, and that's really where the strength of this technology comes forward. Software exists from various suppliers, not naming names at the moment, but if we look at it from the spirit of collaboration, this is the platform for collaboration, basically. We certainly, Howard and ourselves have certainly noticed, obviously COVID has accelerated it, but the digital collaboration in our industry has really improved a lot. And we are now using a SharePoint environment to talk to everybody within the owners team. We're all using the same data set. We have an online approval system that people put their comments on, and it gets tracked. I can report statistics to the customer. It's really, things have really improved compared to the period when I was for instance, at Burgess 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for sure digital collaboration, digital twin being one of them, and improving collaboration is really something that I think we could work on as an industry. Yeah,
because I think what's interesting there, Ivo, is it leads to what I call a much better life cycle approach.
Yeah.
Which I think is one thing that sometimes doesn't actually get enough attention in our marketplace. Build it, deliver it, say goodbye. Maybe they'll come back in a year for a warranty or whatever. But to me, the life cycle approach we take can move a lot higher in terms of its almost attitude and focus.
Well, the lifestyle. If you're approaching, yachts have a long lifetime. If we take Fetchip as a typical example. Some of those are coming back to these yards now and being rebuilt, and I'm sure fast forward 20, 30 years in time, Amos will start doing the same. I'm sure Lursen does the same already. Yep. So you also tie your customers, you tie the future owners of these boats to you, and the digital twin is essentially a digital image of the vessel that stays with the vessel, and therefore ties the shipyard to the owner, to the boat, and obviously one of the major benefits of the digital twin is that you can have a series of sensors in the boat that are linked through the internet to the online platform, and there you can do online approvals, online online surveys. Everything can be done online. DNV is doing this with tankers. The surveyors are not even going on board anymore.
Yeah.
So it's and obviously the digital twin is something that will allow for future autonomous operation even. So what I'm saying is that can we do things differently? Well, we just have to look at the other part of the marine industry, and they are already doing it differently.
Yeah. Howard, what's your expectation of the future?
Good question. I'd really like to see that I think emissions, and we talked a little bit about energy efficiency, but I mean that is going to have to change. And in the automotive landscape, sort of electric cars were bubbling away in the background, and there weren't really many credible solutions. And then there were one or two brands that we knew, and suddenly, in even last year, 2020, that they really started to increase. And now, if just take the situation in the UK, if you're looking to buy a vehicle, they're coming onto the radar and really becoming credible. And it's almost like they've sneaked up on us. My memory as a child growing up, the electric vehicle was the milk float, and it managed about 4 miles an hour. So I think it's really quite exciting that we've got some issues to grapple with, but we're going to see this step change. And we've talked at length on other sort of forums about the benefits that come from some of this new technology in terms of reduced noise and vibration, silent running, and things. And I think picking up on what sort of Ivo was just saying, we think about all these sensors, and if you take a cockpit of an old aircraft, you used to have a crew of 4 or 5 people, and flight engineers are sort of sadly a thing of the past because they've been taken over by computers, sensors, full authority, digital engine control systems. And I think we're sort of, in the marine world, things are quite basic, and actually we can reduce the engineering, the content of engineers on board by having more sensors, which can help essentially the systems can run themselves. They can be more efficient, particularly power demand. The yacht can sort of learn what's required, and I think that's quite an exciting area that we get into. If we look at even racing cars from the sort of late 70s and things, they were very analog, and the main sort of telemetry was somebody on the pit wall with a stopwatch and a lap sheet. And now we look at the amount of sensors and the amount of data that can be sent live, not just to the team on the pit wall and in the back of the garage, but back in the factories, wherever they might be. There's a few hundred people on a race weekend analysing data. Not that we need to go to that level, but I think that in itself is an incredibly interesting area for us.
Well, what it also allows us to do is also manage that risk, but also the blame culture, which you mentioned earlier on, Ivo, because we often hear about things going wrong on boats and people blaming crew or blaming lack of experience or lack of knowledge or lack of training, for another word. So maybe this is part of the process, is actually knowing what really goes wrong or how things are operating is another way of improving that the relationship between all the parties.
Well, I suppose keeps people honest, right? So I think I just wanted to extend a little bit on this autonomy and also the digital twin. Obviously, I think in terms of spirit of collaboration, is obviously there is a role there for yacht management companies that, if in terms of yacht management companies of the future, I think they should really embrace that technology and really get their hands into the yachts through the remote connection. I think, to be honest, we are not yacht managers, so we don't know, but that's something that if I had a yacht management company, that's what I would get myself into.
Yeah. Okay. And your expectation for the future, Ivo? Positive?
Yes, very, very positive. Actually, we used to have a funny saying when we were in the ro-ro industry, is that in the days when I was working for P&O, is that if you want to have work as a consultant, you change the rules. but obviously now the rules are changing, so yeah, but they are changing with a purpose and for a reason, and yes, I do see a change in technology, and I mainly think that is through modular power systems. See, you can't, and you talked a little bit about what stops future owners from coming into our industry, and I really think that we should be honest to them and say you really need to have a future-proof yacht. And what does that mean? In my opinion, obviously that means an electric drivetrain. So you can generate the electricity needed on board through different means. And that can be a generator set running on diesel this year. It can be a generator set in a combination with batteries next year, and then slowly changing towards other opportunities. So modular power systems is very much what I'm keen on, and obviously a change of fuel is necessary to really reduce the CO2 emissions. And the talk within Hydrogen Europe and also within the European projects is very much topics like ammonia, like methanol, like hydrogen, but both compressed and liquid, depending on the autonomy of the vessel. I'm very keen on that technology, but what it means is we have to really go back to proper naval architecture. We have to design for purpose, as in we have to design for the right autonomy of vessels. There's no need to build a super yacht with 7,000 nautical mile range if you've never used it. Think about all the yachts that have fuel in these boats sitting in marinas. The capital tied up in these boats is just on the fuel cost alone is fantastic. Yeah. So it's designed for purpose, really, and that's really what.
I think the whole sort of rethinking the actual operational criteria or the operation model.
Yeah,
is really worth looking at in terms of, as you say, Howard, the power demand equation of air conditioning on all the time when it's just crew on board. The consumption is quite astronomical. Sitting there with fuel for a whole sort of 8-month period or something, it doesn't make sense sometimes.
Yeah.
So what doesn't make sense needs to be addressed as a market to try and optimize and improve our future. I think this is what we're trying to get to in terms of the next generation.
Yeah, I think so. I think, Martin, there is a very nice example of what happened in the past, is that when we go back to the late 60s, early 1970s, there was this new technology that came around. It was called the container. And, this was the new technology of the time. And it required a complete industry-wide approach to really make the container the centralized form of transport. And it is now the centralized form of transport. And it transformed the whole transportation industry. I mean, the way that people did business changed. And that happened in the better part of 25 years. So why can't it do that for the superyacht industry? It is possible. It's just a question of, letting go of the old technology and a change of culture, I say.
Yeah.
Change of culture.
Okay. Final point I want to make before we break. One of the things I put in my head on this session was like, okay, there's a lot of people out there who watch these sessions, captains, project managers, owners, reps, brokers, some owners. What's your one piece of advice that you'd like to give that market, that sector, from a project perspective? What can they do better, or from your experience, or a nugget of advice you'd like to give, Howard?
I think
independent, unbiased, objective advice.
I think take a little bit more time at the beginning. Don't rush in. There's been this big rush to get into something, get the deal done, sign the contract, and then again, it's over to the shipyard. They've got to deliver. They've got to deliver in 30 months, and I've got these LDs. But if they don't deliver in time, and actually really put a little bit more time and effort, get the right people together. The number of conversations that we have, and quite often the outcome is disappointing. Oh, they've just decided to sign it anyway. They think you're very credible, but they think they know better. They don't need the advice, and you don't want to be there saying "I told you so." That's not the business we're in. But unfortunately, that's often what happens. And then even coming in at the end when there's a legal mess and having to be an expert or advise technically to sort it out. So I think that would really be the one piece to look at that front end and just take a little bit more time to breathe, get things correctly set up, do a little bit more engineering, spend a little bit more money before you're committed, really, to make sure everything is right, because actually the overall result will be better, and probably the overall time as well will be quicker in the long run.
Yeah. Ivo, your advice?
I think embrace technology. Basically, don't be afraid of the changes that are coming. Embrace those technologies. Embrace the digital platforms. Embrace the way that we can really, in a digital manner, work better with each other. And the shipyard is not a know-it-all center that knows everything. So be prepared to work with the shipyard rather than set up a trap for the shipyard, which is a box that they have to work in. Embrace technology and work with the shipyard.
Perfect. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Always an interesting conversation with you guys. And I hope to see you soon for a coffee or a beer or whatever. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. And take care.
Welcome.
Thank you, Martin.
Thanks, Martin. Bye-bye.